Welcome to Helping Organizations Thrive. Today I have the pleasure of Lech Guzowski. Good morning to you, Lech.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm well, good to see you. You are a workplace culture facilitator and a leadership and mindset coach. And you're also a podcast host of the podcast. We Got This podcast, which is all about company culture and leadership. And in this episode, we're going to be exploring why teams need conflict and how conflict is a natural part of collaboration, and it actually is a good thing. And by understanding that sort of common response and dynamics, you can use them to really propel your team to new heights. But before we get into that conversation, Lech, what do you love about what you do?
Oh, that's a very, very open question. I'll try and tackle that. I think
There's purpose behind that.
I can imagine. I'll ask a very similar question as an icebreaker on my podcast, so I fully understand the intention. I think what I enjoy the most is something that fits really with my personality is being a little bit contrarian and somewhat a square peg when it comes to it. And I often look through that lens on culture. I believe that we need a different approach to culture. It's not that we need to throw everything out, but we definitely need to evolve some of the business practices that we've got. And that's how I tend to work with my clients. And actually, that's what I really enjoy doing, that element. And most of all, that moment when that penny drops for whoever I'm working with on whatever topic it is, where we start seeing on the same page and they kind of go, oh, we can do it differently. Oh, this is what culture is about, right? For example, or this is what leadership looks like, or this is what self-leadership looks like, or self-management looks like. That when that penny drops, and you can sense it. You don't have to be in the same room, but you can still hear it in somebody's voice. If you see them on Zoom, you can see that, and most of all, you can feel that, and that's what I really enjoy.
And when did you realize that's what you enjoyed? When was the moment? Was it in your career? Was it post-career? Was it a revelation outside of your career?
I don't think there was one moment when I realized that. I remember the first time I was introduced to the Golden Circle by Simon Sinek, and exactly know when that was, where I was, who I was with. And that's kind of what really started me on this path of what is this self-leadership? What is leadership? What is culture about? And at that time, this probably goes back now at least 8 or 9 years, if not more than that. And at that time, I was a project manager. And the more I went into that, the more I was focusing and actually paying more attention, not to the spreadsheets and budgets and timelines, but why did a project fall over, or why was it delayed from a people's point of view, from a leader's point of view? What did I do to make that happen? How did I contribute to that? Or what did I not do? How did I not support my teams to be able to deliver it online? What was it? What was blocking them? And that's kind of how I went on down that path.
And we're talking conflict today. It can be perceived as quite a negative thing to talk about. I think most people would shy away from conflict. And so with that sort of premise of setting up really well with this one, why do you believe that conflict can actually be really beneficial within teams?
Mm-hmm. The metaphor I like to use when it comes to conflict is that it's basically you've got people working together, they're coming together. They've got different needs. As a result, things they will clash, and there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of energy, and that's what conflict is an accumulation of energy. It's this massive bowl that you've got in front of you that you're trying to control, contain in one way or another. And what do we tend to do is that we often pretend that we don't know how to deal with that, so that it's not there. But we've got a choice. We can either try and handle it, so that to harness all that power, all that energy, all those emotions that is in it, or we can try and sweep it under the carpet, pretend that it's not there. Sooner or later, somebody's going to trip over it, first of all. Second of all, it often actually blows up in your face and destroys everything in the vicinity. I'm of the mindset that it's better to actually try and resolve conflict. And that conflict is not bad, because if you look at it through the lens of team development, that's what needs to happen in one of the stages. That's actually a necessary aspect, because conflict is simply a natural part of people working together. It's not feasible, I don't think. I'm not that much of an idealist to believe that everybody can get along perfectly 100% of the time. We need conflict, it's a natural part of collaboration. We just need to learn what to do with it. and how to handle it.
And I guess you're almost getting us to think a bit differently about it, because as soon as you mentioned a conflict, it feels like you're going into battle, which obviously that's where the word comes from, and you're hunkering down and you're putting the arbor on, and an adrenaline flow. There's an emotional reaction when sort of conflict is said or felt, isn't it? And so how as a, before we dive into the team spirit, how as an individual, how can we sort of handle that? Because it naturally gets our back up, and because it's perceived as an unpleasant thing. How do we sort of, I guess, reframe it and shift it into a way that's not so, fight or flight sort of kicking into our system?
But actually, you're right. It often is because of how we perceive, how we kind of define conflict. We tend to tense up. Biological reactions and psychological reactions, emotional reactions. That's what's happening. But then, if you look at what conflict is, there are multiple definitions, right? You Google it, at least half a dozen are going to come up. The one that I often like to use, and this really works on an individual from an individual point of view, is that you've got a need, and then I've got a need as well. And my need, for some reason, I've got this perception that your need or somebody else is blocking my need, which is causing me frustration. And this is the key word, and that is the perception. I think that something or somebody is blocking my need, and that's causing me frustration. And the important bit, that doesn't constitute a conflict yet. What constitutes conflict is what you do as a result of that. Your actions, your behaviors through that. And we often try and kind of think it's my need or your need. It's one or the other, that it's binary. It's either or. Whilst in reality, it's better to look at as much as possible through a lens in a scenario of both and. I've got my need, you've got your need. How can we make this work? And based on that, you've got a few ways you can tackle it. I often refer to Thomas Kuhlman's model instrument for conflict. By the way, I'll send you a link afterwards with a little goodie with some of the resources of the things that we might cover and your listeners might find of interest when it comes to conflict. But basically, the model said it looks at it, how we respond to conflict based on that definition of needs. I've got a need. If I'm going to put my need over your need, I'm competing. But then if I'm going to put your need over mine, the other way around, basically then I'm accommodating. Or if I don't think of my need or your need at all, I'm basically just avoiding things. Ultimately, we want to be in a scenario where my need is met and your need is met. That's true collaboration. But we often need to be careful so that we're not actually compromising. It's a nice stepping stone towards collaboration, but often we kind of say, we'll compromise. We'll take a bit of my need, a bit of your need, works to move things forward, but over the long run, causes problems. And I think if we start looking at conflict through the lenses of needs and how that fits into, for me individually, but then throughout within a team and throughout an organization, that gives us more scope to kind of understand conflict better and deal with it better as a result.
So you introduced the word collaboration there, but the thing that struck me with what you just explained there almost felt like a negotiation there. So you've got a need, they've got a need, and sometimes negotiation can be a little bit, conflict sort of approach, isn't it? It's how you approach it, and that's not helpful actually. But if you collaborate, which is almost a little bit putting everything on the table and getting different perspectives and starting to think, how can we make this work for both of us? And not the old adage cliche win-win, but a little bit more, the sum of the parts are greater than the individual parts mindset. Yeah. It's a slightly different perspective, isn't it? And it requires a little bit of, I suppose, a bit of risk to it, because you're not entirely sure what the outcome's going to be, is it? That's always the thing with that sort of, because you're putting your bit on and they've got their bit, and you're not entirely sure where it's going to end entirely.
You're right that it's kind of negotiation, but there's two things about what you said. One of the main reasons I think it's feels like negotiation is because we still operate from an either or scenario. Whilst if you move to both and, that I can have my need met and you can have your need met, where we are more likely to collaborate and kind of for this to go slightly smoother, and for us without neither of us feeling that we're sacrificing. That's the first thing. The second thing, and I think this is the most important one, is before all of this, you and I need to realize our needs individually, what they are. And I think that's the biggest struggle, right? When something happens when you're working in a team and you feel threatened, Why is that? Why? What did that? What button was pushed for you to feel this way? Does it have anything to do with what the person said and did, and the project, or did that push something much deeper that you haven't yet realized? Some sort of emotional trauma from when you were younger. I'm not a psychologist. I'm really fascinated by the topic, but a lot of it does link to the triggers that we've got.
So it's almost, that's interesting, isn't it? It's almost taking it to a real self-awareness point of view, isn't it? Trying to get an understanding why certain behavior or somebody proposed something. Why did that trigger me? What was going on there? Rather than, as you say, it's not always on the surface of what it was they said. It's something else going on. How within a team then do we use, or I suppose embrace, conflict? Because you said that conflict is part of the whole process of building a successful team. How as a leader do they need to help manage conflict, and do they just let it happen and just sort themselves out, or is there a way of facilitating an environment that will really help conflict resolution, or use it in a positive way?
Yeah. As I said earlier, conflict is a natural part of collaboration, and it's one of the stages of team development. The two most famous probably models of team development, Tuckman's, where you've got forming, storming, a clue there, norming and performing, right? And then you've got adjourning, I think, but that is the last one. A slight variation of that is Susan Whelan's model of integrated model of group development, I believe it's called. Second stage basically builds on Tuckman. The main difference is that termination, which is the fifth stage, can happen at any stage. It's less linear, if that makes sense. So understanding the stages of team development, what's meant to happen when, and what leadership style is required, is the first protocol for any leader in my book. Naturally, leaders will fall into certain kind of predispositions and what leadership style they've got, and that will fit with one of the stages. And there will some that they're less comfortable with. But if you look at the second stage, is about counterdependency and fighting. First of all, it's natural, as I said.
I love that. Fight has already got the word fighting.
It's got fighting in it. There's literally no avoiding that.
That's taking conflict to a graphic illustration of it. It's fighting now.
It's fighting. Actually, I need to look at when. I don't remember when this model was developed. It does go back probably quite a few years. Slightly less politically correct times. Therefore, probably the word fighting is there. But then, what's the point of beating around the bush? Name it, call it as you see it. So it's normal. In the first stage, everybody's coming together, everybody's nice, everybody's polite. And by the way, this doesn't apply just to teams at work. This applies to any kind of group. You can probably relate that to, meeting new people on a networking event, becoming part of a new community and things like that. Or when you're a student as well, when you go to university, for example. At first, everybody gets along because everybody wants to sit at the table. And then the different role of a leader is required. But in the second stage, everybody's trying to the team, if we link it back to work, the team's trying to develop its identity. It's trying to question, it will start questioning things, right? Subgroups will start forming. The team will have need for independence. They will be seeking their roles. They will be pushing the boundaries of what's possible. They will be pushing the leader in terms of what they get from him, what they want from him, what are the rules and the regulations, and trying to set that up. So it's normal that there's going to be friction as a result of that. And also, then this is the key that's often missing. This is where performance dips. And it needs to dip because they need time and energy to resolve all of these issues before moving further on. By the way, these models are not linear. If a lot of them suggest that, but it's not linear. It's not as simple. But just using as a guide, it's really, really helpful. What do leaders need to do in a particular sense? The leadership style that's required in this is coaching, clearly. And the first one is directing, where you're really telling people what to do and when and how, because they need that guidance from you. But in the second one, you need to step back as a leader. You need to adapt more of a coaching mindset. And this is what a lot of leaders find difficult, because they still want to maintain that initial control. But actually, in reality, they need to start letting go, because the ultimate aim is at the end of, stage 4 or 5, depending which model you use, you want to be completely outside the team. The team needs to be self-sufficient. You're supposed to be there to support them when they need you, not you running the show. So from a point of view of a coach, obviously build the relationships, help teams resolve that conflict around goals, roles, and kind of leadership, because that's what's going to come up. Facilitate that collaboration, but don't think and take things personally, because that's often what happens. The leader thinks, this is on me, this is something that I'm doing. Not necessarily. It's them. They need to sort it out. You've got a team of 5, 10, 12 people, whatever. They need to work it out themselves, because the aim is that you will be kind of leaving them. You will be further outside of that team more and more as the team matures. So clarify the goals, clarify roles, coach for openness and vulnerability, because ultimately that's what we want, and steer conflict towards the matters at hand of what it is about, rather than things getting personal, because often it can be. People will feel offended, emotions will start to boil over, and people will start taking things personally when there's actually no need for that to happen.
And when you're in that sort of fighting mode or conflict mode or phase, how can we decipher, and this can be quite difficult sometimes, I think, when somebody has crossed the line in that scenario, and it's gone from a sort of a healthy sort of conflict, whatever healthy conflict is. I mean, that's probably a very subjective thing, to what I would call more toxic, perhaps more harmful. How do we decipher that? And as a leader, what sort of intervention would you do to try and get it back to be more healthy sort of conflict?
At that stage, you will already start having some norms and rules of how you want teams to work together. They're still going to be pushing it. They're still going to be trying to challenge it, but you will have a baseline. So first point of call is how far off that baseline is somebody pushing it? What type of behavior is causing it? And most of all, how is it impacting the team? Because you've got the classic example that you've got a toxic top performer within an organization of a team. What do you do with them? They continue bringing in the money because they're the best salesperson in the company, but ultimately in the long run, it's not helping us have a healthy culture, healthy team. So looking at that's the first point, kind of monitoring that. As a leader, again, I'm always steering towards letting the team self-regulate itself, because I'm a big believer in self-managed teams, that we need definitely more of that. And I would suggest trying to encourage the team to self-regulate, to kind of see, okay, what are you seeing, right? So again, adapting that coaching mindset rather than providing answers, because ultimately this is what you're trying to create. You're trying to give the team more autonomy for the simple reason. Imagine that 6 months down the line, when hopefully the team's more mature, you want to take a sabbatical for 2 months, but the team needs to still continue running, right? That's the kind of cliche example. How are they going to cooperate without you? This is the stages when you're building the foundations for that.
And how do we, when you've got an established team, they've all, worked out the group norms, what the boundaries are, how each other's works, and there's still probably, at points a little bit of conflicts, and probably, I say, healthy conflicts. As you say, the models are not sort of linear, that you go bounce around a little bit within that concept. When you bring two new team members in, which again changes that dynamics again, how do we sort of ensure that we get integration, but not in integration that just levels everything, but actually brings more value to that team? Because that's why you're bringing new team members in, because I'm just going to the lowest common denominator, actually, to raise the game, and potentially could be an outside threat when new team members come, which can cause that. So how do we sort of use that approach to create that sort of, not destabilizing, but use it in a way that's really positive for team performance?
The fact is, and this is often omitted, is that when you've got a manager changing, when there's somebody leaving the team or joining the team, the clock resets. You're back to square one. So you're again going through those stages. You're back to the drawing board. So as a leader, when you've got somebody new coming in, you again need to adapt that different, more of a directing mindset within the organization. Not to the extreme. It's not as starting a completely new team, but you need to revert through that. So again, conflict will continue to happen. The team will require more guidance for you. So again, you have to step in. likelihood is, you're going to move through these stages because the team's mature, so it's easier to and it's got its way of working. It's going to and somebody new comes in, it will potentially destabilize it, as you said, but hopefully the person that joins the team has been picked and recruited in mind with how this team works, right? It's not about, if you've got a well-oiled machine and the team's working well, you don't want to introduce somebody who might destabilize that. So first thing is you make sure that the person that you're putting in that team actually has the same mindset, similar values, understands what it is, whether they're from within the organization or somebody new when you're recruiting them. Make sure that you check for that. And the second thing is, conflict will always happen. Yes, it's the biggest accumulation is around the earlier stages, but as we said earlier, it's a natural part of collaboration, so it will happen, right? And I'm not naive enough to think that it won't. At later stages, but again, it will be easier to deal with whatever's happening because there are so many things that are defined. We're familiar with working with one another. I know what makes me tick. I know what makes you tick, and how we can manage that in a collaborative way.
And what would be, from a leader's point of view, the obstacles for, I guess, this not happening, this sort of process, or the fear of conflict and wanting to sort of keep everything sort of nice? What would get in the way of all that? And how, as a leader or even as a team, how do we overcome those challenges?
The most common one I see is the leadership styles. We've got natural ones that we fall into, and they work with parts of the maturity of the team, different stages. And as the team, the more mature the team is, the less they need you. Therefore, you more go into a collaborative, a visionary style. And that's what a lot of leaders find very difficult. So I would say, if you are struggling, if the team is not performing, if you're not happy, first of all, look at yourself. How are you managing your team? What are you doing? Are you relinquishing control? Because if it might be that the leader is actually holding a team back from maturing, from becoming a better organization, a better team, and better group of people working together. Simply because they are, again, they're attached to that control element, that directing element, that everything needs to go through them. And I'm not talking here about toxic leaders. I'm talking here about leaders who might simply be doing that without realizing. Subconsciously, they've never thought about it. They never had the proper support or the coaching from mentoring from higher ups within the organization. Because let's face it, people get promoted into managerial and a leadership role, but pretty much most of the time get abandoned in that they're trained how to do their job, but they're not trained how to lead people. And I think that's a huge piece that's missing. So for me, always, as a leader, always check in with yourself, what it is that you're doing, that you're contributing. And if you can honestly say that you feel this is nothing to do with you, that the ways you are contributing are minimal, that's fine. Okay, look beyond. What is it with the team norms? What is it with the team dynamics? Is the setup, have you got a toxic performer within your team, or toxic underperformer?
You just mentioned there almost your leadership style changes as the team sort of changes here. So you talked about that, towards the end when it's fully functioning and you go to more of a collaborative, visionary type of approach. Just talk us through the different stages. What's the approach of that leader at the sort of different stages of sort of team development to get the best out of the team, to make sure the team not only gels but becomes that high performing teams that you would expect?
In the first stages, depending whether, it doesn't matter really whether you use Tuckman, Susan Whelan, or whatever. The first one, when the team comes together, they need clear direction. So your leadership style is that it's directing the work, everything that needs to happen, roles, structures, purpose, goals, you name it. That's what you need to do. Everybody's looking at you. You're standing on the stage, everybody's looking at you. Second one is coaching. So you need to start releasing some of the control. You need to encourage autonomy, and for people to start handling conflict and things like that on their own. Therefore, they're still looking at you, but they're already talking with one another. So you still in the center, but there's things going on around you. And the third one would be collaborative, where you step out. You're not in the center anymore. You're one of the people that they consult. So you more collaborative. You're letting the team take on more responsibility. You delegate. You facilitate and encourage participation, and basically encouraging questioning kind of how to support how things are done. And then the last bit is, which is kind of where you take on a visionary role. You basically, if you think that your team is here, at the start you were in the center, now your team is here, you're here, you're just outside of it. You connected with them through a dotted line, indirectly in a way, because they are running the show. They need you, not as a safety net, but okay, we're stuck, we don't know how to do, we need additional support, we need leverage, or we need somebody to step in for us at a more senior level within the organization. We get the leader in, right? So it's about supporting and removing any roadblocks to the team achieving that high performance, to whatever their goals are, and setting new goals, new objectives together with the team, and not for the team, but together with them.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to recognize that, we need to sort of adapt our leadership style in the context of how teams change. Because I think some people have a style, and we all have an authentic style, clearly, in how we operate. But we need to be more situationally focused as well. And I think observing what's going on with the team and what's then best for them, how can I serve them? And I think that's good to know. And I think it's important to know, because I think people just think, oh, this is my style, like it or lump it. That's how I will do it. But if you want high performance, you need to sort of modify and be agile in that approach. Is there any sort of final thoughts in terms of, any other examples you've got where you've seen conflict as being a real accelerator of team performance?
I'd like to come back to the one thing that you said just now about kind of evolving the leadership styles in different stages. One thing to do that we organizations can consider doing, and I've seen it happen. It's not ideal because it's destabilizing a little bit, but if you've got organizations and teams and leaders who are very, very good at certain stages, yes, you can help them through developing different leadership styles. But then one thing to consider works really well for the early stages is, moving managers around. When you've got a mature team, although if you injected a new or semi-mature team, if you injected a new manager, the clock would reset on them and on that team, but they would quicker come up to those later stages again because the team's matured. So that's one thing potentially to consider. But in terms of conflict and how we can use that, again, look at where the frictions are. But the most important thing is, don't avoid it. Don't be scared of it. We tend to avoid it simply because we don't know what to do with it. But if you start looking at conflict through the the lens of needs and understanding what's meant to happen at which stage of a team's development and how you fit into that as a leader, things will be, I don't want to say easy, but easier to maintain. And if you are interested in all of this, the kind of the theory, all the stages of development that I've mentioned, I'll share the link with you, Julian, later on. If you go to human.pm/conflict, you'll find a few links and a few resources that I've mentioned here specifically about today, kind of linked to that. So feel free to check that out, and it will hopefully make more sense even further when you kind of dive into that topic.
Yeah, and I think it's important that, I think you said that right at the start, is almost having that different reframe perspective on what conflict is and seeing it actually as a positive thing that can really enable team performance. Thank you for your insights, Lech. If people want to connect, you've already said there's a link there, but if people want to connect with you, get in touch with you, how else might they do that?
LinkedIn is the best protocol. I'm there way too many hours every day, but that's definitely the easiest place to do. Through that website, you'll be able to find all the resources that I've mentioned, and some culture and micro practices will be there related specifically to conflict. And that's probably the two easiest ways to keep up with what I'm doing. And if you want to chat or a virtual coffee, just drop me a line on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for your time today, Lech.
Thank you very much.